In 2015, a patch of ocean in the South China Sea called Mischief Reef looked exactly like what it was, a sandbar barely above the waterline, about 900 miles from the Chinese mainland, inside waters that international law says belong to the Philippines. Satellite imagery from that year shows almost nothing there, some shallow water, a few small structures, a dot in the ocean. 10 years later, satellite imagery from the same coordinates shows something else entirely. Runways, more than 72 hardened aircraft hangars, surface-to-air missile batteries, anti-ship cruise missile platforms, radar arrays, deep-water piers long enough to berth naval destroyers, a fully operational military base built from scratch on a reef that was underwater, in waters where China has no legal right to build anything. Mischief Reef is not alone. According to satellite imagery analyzed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China has now built 27 military outposts across the South China Sea, covering a combined area of roughly 7,900 acres, larger than the entire island of Manhattan. And in May 2025, satellite imagery captured something that made defense analysts go quiet. Two H-6K bombers, China's most advanced nuclear-capable aircraft, sitting on the runway at Woody Island in the Paracel chain, the first time those bombers had been seen at that location in 5 years. A message timed to land just before the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, where U.S. and allied defense chiefs were gathering to discuss exactly this. Gregory Poling, director of CSIS's Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, summarized what those 27 bases actually contain. Harbors, large runways, more than 72 fighter jet hangars across the 3 big island bases, surface-to-air missile and anti-ship cruise missile emplacements, and a lot of radar, sensing, and communications infrastructure. What was once an episodic source of tension has turned into a 24/7 coercive campaign. His words, not ours. In this video, we're going to show you exactly what China built, how it built it, and why the U.S. admiral in charge of the Pacific told Congress it was the most significant military construction he's seen in his lifetime. We'll explain what the 9-dash line actually is, and why an international court already ruled it illegal. We'll walk through every incident between China and the Philippines over the past year, including one where a Chinese naval helicopter came within 10 feet of a Philippine aircraft. And we'll explain the treaty clause that could drag the United States into a shooting war with China, triggered by a confrontation at a reef that most Americans can't find on a map.
Every year, more than $3 trillion in goods moves through the South China Sea. Electronics from Taiwan, energy from the Middle East destined for Japan and South Korea, consumer products heading to American ports. Roughly 1/3 of all global maritime trade passes through these waters. If that shipping lane closes, or if the country that controls it decides to charge a toll, the price of almost everything you buy goes up immediately. That's what makes the South China Sea different from most territorial disputes. It's not just about islands. It's about who controls the arteries of the global economy. China's claim to those arteries is based on something called the 9-dash line, a U-shaped boundary that encompasses roughly 62% of the South China Sea, according to the U.S. Department of State. The line was inherited from a 1947 map produced by the Chinese nationalist government before the Communist Party took power. China has never clearly defined what the line means, whether it's a territorial claim, a historical rights claim, or something else entirely. It changes its explanation depending on the audience. What it has never done is explain how the line is consistent with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the international treaty that governs maritime boundaries, and that China itself signed and ratified. In 2013, the Philippines took China to an international tribunal under UNCLOS, arguing that China's claims and its construction activities on Philippine reefs violated international law. In July 2016, the tribunal ruled unanimously that China's 9-dash line claim had no legal basis under international law. It ruled that China had violated the Philippines' sovereign rights. It ruled that China's island building had caused serious harm to the marine environment. China's response was immediate and consistent. It refused to acknowledge the ruling existed. Beijing called it null and void and continued building. Between December 2013 and October 2015 alone, Chinese dredgers built artificial islands with a total area of close to 3,000 acres on 7 coral reefs in the Spratly Islands. By January 2025, CSIS's Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative calculated that China had buried roughly 4,648 acres of coral reef since 2013, destroying one of the most biodiverse marine ecosystems on Earth permanently, to build military bases that international law says should not exist. Greg Poling of CSIS noted that it may take decades for those reefs to come back, if they come back at all. The South China Sea contains an estimated 3.6 billion barrels of proved or probable oil reserves and 40.3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, according to the U.S. Energy Administration. That's part of what China is sitting on top of. And through it all, through the island building, through the military deployments, through the tribunal ruling that Beijing ignored, the world largely watched, and China kept building.
The 3 centerpieces of China's South China Sea military network are called the Big Three: Fiery Cross Reef, Mischief Reef, and Subi Reef, all in the Spratly Islands, all claimed by the Philippines under international law, all now fully armed Chinese military bases. Fiery Cross Reef. Fiery Cross Reef has a runway just over 9,800 feet long enough to support any aircraft in China's military inventory, including heavy bombers. Satellite imagery from May 31, 2025, captured by the Copernicus browser Sentinel-2 system, shows the base functioning as what CSIS analysts describe as a central command hub, with hardened aircraft hangars, deep water harbors capable of berthing naval destroyers and frigates, and advanced sensor installations covering the surrounding sea and air. Mischief Reef. Mischief Reef, the one that was a sandbar in 2015, now has more than 72 aircraft hangars for fighter jets. Not 72 aircraft, 72 hardened hangars that can shelter 72 aircraft from attack. It has air defense systems, anti-ship missile platforms, advanced radar installations, and communications facilities. Then U.S. Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral John Aquilino said in 2022 that the military infrastructure on Mischief Reef appeared to have been completed. He added, "They can fly fighters, bombers, plus all those offensive capabilities of missile systems. They've threatened all nations who operate in the vicinity and all the international sea and airspace." Subi Reef. Subi Reef has a runway nearly 10,000 feet long, confirmed by European Space Agency Sentinel-2 satellite imagery. Aircraft hangars, communications arrays, hardened shelters, and docks are all visible from orbit. The runway length is specifically designed to support heavy aircraft, the same class as the H-6K bomber. Woody Island, the nuclear signal. Woody Island in the Paracel chain is China's largest and most established base in the South China Sea. It's where, in May 2025, Maxar Technologies satellite imagery captured 2 H-6K bombers on the runway, the first time those specific aircraft had been seen there since 2020. The H-6K is China's most capable long-range strategic bomber. It has a combat radius of approximately 1,900 nautical miles. That's roughly 2,190 miles. From Woody Island, that range covers the entire South China Sea, all of Southeast Asia, and approaches to U.S. facilities in the Pacific. From the Spratly Island bases further south, the same aircraft can reach northern Australia and Guam, where the U.S. maintains major military installations. The H-6K can carry conventional cruise missiles. It can also carry nuclear-capable ballistic missiles. The satellite imagery doesn't tell you which payload was loaded. That ambiguity is the point. Also visible in the May 2025 Woody Island imagery, 2 Y-20 heavy transport aircraft, and a KG-500 airborne early warning plane. The KG-500 is China's equivalent of the U.S. E-3 AWACS. It sees everything in the air within hundreds of miles and can coordinate complex multi-domain operations. Its presence at Woody Island in May 2025 tells analysts that this wasn't a visit, it was a rehearsal. The Jiaoshi upgrade, what nobody covered. In March 2025, satellite imagery revealed significant expansion at China's Jiaoshi Air Base on Hainan Island, which sits at the northern edge of the South China Sea. The images showed 19 new large hangars under construction, each measuring approximately 180 feet wide and 213 feet deep, large enough to house H-6 series bombers. Among the aircraft already observed at the base, 3 H-6K or H-6N bombers, 6 KG-500 airborne early warning aircraft, and Y-9JB electronic warfare platforms. The hangars are dispersed into split layout, northwest section and southeast section, a design specifically intended to reduce vulnerability to a first strike. China is not just building island bases in the middle of the sea. It's upgrading the mainland bases that support those islands at the same time, creating a layered defense network that analysts say was not present 5 years ago.
On October 13, 2025, the U.S. State Department issued a statement. China had just rammed and water cannoned a Philippine vessel near Sandy Cay in the Spratly Islands. State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott condemned the action and said Washington stood with its ally. Then he cited, word for word, the legal commitment. Article 4 of the 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty extends to armed attacks on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of its Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea. Anywhere in the South China Sea. That's the treaty. The incidents that could trigger it have been accelerating. A U.S. Senate resolution tracking events in the region noted that on February 18, 2025, the Chinese PLA Navy helicopter flew as close as 3 meters, less than 10 feet, above a Philippine aircraft conducting a routine patrol over Scarborough Shoal. On December 4, 2024, Chinese Coast Guard and PLA Navy vessels deployed water cannons against Philippine Coast Guard vessels near the same location. And on August 11, 2025, a China Coast Guard vessel and a PLA Navy warship collided while pursuing a Philippine Coast Guard patrol vessel near Scarborough Shoal, an incident captured on video and released by the Philippine government. These are not accidents. The East Asia Forum's 2026 analysis of the South China Sea situation described China's approach as a 24/7 coercive campaign, a deliberate, methodical effort to establish facts on the water without crossing the formal threshold of armed attack that would automatically trigger U.S. treaty obligations. In September 2025, China declared a nature reserve at Scarborough Shoal, a feature inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Both the United States and the Philippines rejected the declaration as unlawful. China continued enforcing it anyway. The U.S. response and its limits. The United States has deepened its military engagement with the Philippines substantially over the past 2 years. In March 2025, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth visited Manila for his first trip to an Indo-Pacific partner and committed to deploy additional advanced military capabilities, conduct high-end bilateral training, and prioritize bilateral defense industry cooperation. In 2026, the U.S. and Philippines are scheduled to conduct over 500 joint military exercises, a record number according to the Johns Hopkins SAIS Review of International Affairs analysis from February 2026. Japan has sold military ships and equipment to the Philippines and Vietnam. Australia has increased naval patrols in the region. The EU has issued statements condemning Chinese provocations. None of it has slowed the construction. None of it has moved a single Chinese vessel from the waters it occupies, and none of it answers the core question: if China launches a water cannon attack that kills a Filipino sailor, which is Article 4 territory, what does the United States actually do? The strategic picture.
What China has built in the South China Sea is not primarily a set of bases for offensive operations against the United States. It's a set of positions that change the military geometry of any conflict in the Indo-Pacific, particularly any conflict involving Taiwan. Those 27 outposts provide what China's own PLA analysts call all-weather and all-round situational awareness over the South China Sea. Every U.S. or allied ship that moves through those waters is being watched, tracked, and cataloged. The radar arrays and sensor installations on Mischief, Subi, and Fiery Cross Reefs can monitor military activity across the entire theater, and the bomber deployments send a specific message to specific audiences. All 5 Philippine military bases being developed under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States fall within the combat radius of H-6K bombers based at the South China Sea Islands, according to AMTI's analysis. That means that if the U.S. tries to use those bases in a Taiwan contingency, Chinese bombers, already positioned in the South China Sea, are already within striking distance. The Congressional Research Service noted bluntly in a May 2025 report that PLA bases in the South China Sea would be vulnerable to a U.S. attack. That's true. The islands are static. They can be hit. But hitting them would be an act of war, and the political and diplomatic threshold for that decision is exactly what Beijing has spent the last decade calculating how to keep as high as possible.
In 2015, Mischief Reef was a sandbar. Today, it's a military city in the middle of the sea 900 miles from China and squarely inside waters that international law assigned to the Philippines. The tribunal that ruled on this exists. The ruling exists. China simply decided not to follow it and kept building. 27 outposts, 7,900 acres of artificial land on top of destroyed coral reef, more than 72 hardened aircraft hangars, runways that can handle nuclear-capable bombers, a Chinese helicopter that flew within 10 feet of a Philippine aircraft on a routine patrol, a Chinese vessel that rammed a Philippine Coast Guard ship in October 2025, triggering a U.S. State Department statement citing the Mutual Defense Treaty. The South China Sea is not a distant geopolitical dispute. It's a $3 trillion maritime corridor with a U.S. ally on one side, Chinese military bases on the other, a 1951 treaty that says America is obligated to respond to an armed attack on that ally, and a 24/7 campaign of coercion designed to find exactly where that obligation begins. Whatever happens next in these waters will not stay in these waters. The outcome will determine whether international law matters in the 21st century, whether U.S. alliance commitments remain credible across the Indo-Pacific, and whether the country that controls a third of global trade gets to decide what the rules of that control look like. Subscribe to World Shift and turn on notifications. Every day, we bring you the stories that are too important to ignore and too complex to fit in a headline, explained clearly, backed by verified facts, with nothing invented. Understanding what's coming starts today. We'll see you in the next one.